to the Supreme Court of the United States. After meeting with Judge Gorsuch and having a long and pleasant conversation, after hearing his testimony before the Judiciary Committee, and after carefully reviewing his record, I have concluded that I cannot support a man with his views for a lifetime seat on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the most important judicial body in this country. The decisions that it reaches, even on a 5-4 vote, have a profound impact on all Americans, on our environment, and on our way of life. As we decide this week as to how we are going to cast our votes regarding Judge Gorsuch, it is important to understand how that vote for Judge Gorsuch, for or against him, will impact the lives of the people of our country. Let me give you just a few examples as to what is at stake. 7 years ago, in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Citizens United. And in that case, by a 5-4 decision, the court said that billionaires and corporations could spend as much money as they wanted on the political process. This decision, as all Americans know, opened the floodgates of corporate money, of money from the billionaire class, such that the wealthiest people in our country today can now elect candidates who represent their interests and not the interests of ordinary Americans. That decision, Citizens United, is undermining American democracy and, in my view, is moving us toward an oligarchic form of society in which a handful of the wealthiest people in this country, the Koch brothers and others, now have the power not only to control our economy, but our political life as well. In my view, Citizens United must be overturned, and we must move back to a nation where our political system is based on one person, one vote, not on the ability of billionaires to buy elections. Based on my conversation with Judge Gorsuch and a review of his record, do I believe that he will vote to overturn Citizens United? Absolutely not. Further, I suspect that he will vote to undermine our democracy even further by supporting the elimination of all restrictions on campaign finance, something which the Republican leadership in this body wants. What the Republican leadership is striving towards is eliminating all campaign finance restrictions such that billionaires can say to somebody, I'm going to give you $500 million to run for the U.S. Senate from California, and you work for me. No independent expenditures. I will select your campaign manager, your speechwriter, your media advisor, your pollster. You are my employee. That is what Republican leadership here wants. They want to undermine all campaign finance laws that on campaign finance. And I believe that Judge Gorsuch will move this country in that way, a more and more undemocratic way. Further, when we talk about the political process, it's important to point out that in 2013, again, by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court gutted the 1965 historic Voting Rights Act a law which was passed to combat racial discrimination in voting in a number of states. What the court said, finally, is that in the United States you have the right to vote no matter what the color of your skin is. An historic step forward in making this country the kind of country that it must become. Well, as a result of that 5-4 Supreme Court decision in 2013 gutting the Voting Rights Act, literally days after, we had Republican governors and Republican legislatures all over this country under the guise of fighting voter fraud, passing laws intentionally, everybody knows this, intentionally designed to make it harder for people of color, for poor people, for young people, for older people to vote in elections. In America in the year 2017, it is not too much to ask that all of our people who are eligible to vote be able to vote without harassment, without roadblocks, without barriers being placed in front of them. I know it is a radical idea, Mr. President, but it's called democracy. It's called democracy. It says that if you are eligible to vote, we want you to vote. We want you to participate. It says that in America, when we have one of the lowest voter turnout rates of any major country on earth, we want more people to be participating in the political process, not fewer people. Mr. President, there is nothing that I have seen in Judge Gorsuch's record or in his recent statements to suggest to me that he is prepared to overturn this disastrous decision on the Voting Rights Act. Mr. President, in 1973, as we all know, the Supreme Court decided Roe versus Wade and declared that women have a constitutional right to control their own bodies. That decision has been subsequently affirmed by multiple cases as recently as last June. In his confirmation hearings, Judge Gorsuch refused to state if he believed Roe v. Wade was good law and should be upheld. Based on his statements and general philosophy, I believe there is a strong likelihood that Judge Gorsuch would vote to overturn Roe v. Wade and deny the women of this country the constitutional right to control their own bodies. This would be an outrage, and I do not want to be a party to allowing that to happen. In addition, under Chief Justice John Roberts, the Supreme Court has time and time again voted in support of corporate interests and against the needs of the working people of our country. After reviewing Judge Gorsuch's record, I believe that he will continue that trend. In a case called Trans Am Trucking, Judge Gorsuch argued that a trucker was properly fired by his employer for abandoning his cargo at the side of the road after his truck broke down and he nearly froze to death waiting for help. Judge Gorsuch literally believed that this man should have had to choose between his life and his job, and by choosing his life, not freezing to death, he deserved to lose his job. In another case, Judge Gorsuch ruled that a university was correct to fire a professor battling cancer rather than grant her request to extend her sick leave. I find these decisions troubling. At a time of massive income and wealth inequality, when so many working people throughout this country feel powerless at the hands of the wealthy and the powerful and their employers, We need a Supreme Court justice who will protect workers' rights and not just worry about corporate profits. I fear very much that Judge Gorsuch is not that person. Mr. President, I listened carefully to what my friend, Senator Cornyn of Texas, had to say about this entire process. And I have to say that in his remarks there was a whole lot of obfuscation, because there is a simple reality that we are going to have to deal with here in the Senate this week. Everybody knows, and Senator Cornyn made the point, that under Harry Reid, former Democratic leader, the rules, in fact, were changed. And they were changed because of an unprecedented level of Republican obstructionism, making it impossible for President Obama to get almost any of his nominees appointed. But let us not forget that in the midst of that controversial decision, and it was a controversial decision, the Democratic leader had the power to also say that we will waive the 60-vote rule regarding Supreme Court nominees. Democrats had the power, and they chose not to exercise that power in ending that rule, although, of course, they could have done that. And I think the reason is that the Democratic leadership appropriately and correctly believed that on an issue of such magnitude, the appointment of a Supreme Court justice, it is important that there be bipartisan support. But right now, it appears that the Republican leadership is going to do what the Democratic leadership did not do, and that is waive that rule and get their judge appointed with 51 votes. So I would suggest to the Republican leader that instead of trying to push this nominee through with 50-some-odd votes, it might make more sense than, rather than changing the rule, change the nominee and bring forth somebody who, in fact, can get 60 votes. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor. Note the absence of the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.